which is in contemporary research. And the model here he is proposing is by studying the relationship between the firms, individual firms to other firms, and the branch of the firms, we could, based on these business networks, to start to understand the linkage and the rank of contemporary global cities, which are more and more interconnected. And but in a sense, he doesn't totally against the central plate theory. He believes is that these two things are operating on two scales. The central flow theory could explain a kind of intercity relationship, while the central plate theory are more operating on kind of a center-periphery sense, which is more based on the local scale. It's interesting to look at this central flow theory, but my question is, what is the role of urban space in this theoretical background, and is it possible, or it is really necessary to treat these two theories as complementary? Is it really necessary when we studying the local scale? Is it really necessary to go back to central plate theory? So I'm thinking if it is possible to develop a kind of to stick on this kind of flow-centered approach instead of plate-centered approach in local scale, especially in the scale of urban. And well, in the first part of the research, about the urban planning history in China, from this image we can see that there's kind of ideal city model in Chinese planning system that's very much related with the social hierarchy, and the model itself could be could be regarded as a kind of expression of the social hierarchies. For instance, the palace should be placed in the middle, and the temple of ancestors and temple of soul should be placed in a very important position in front of the palace. Well, the market is kind of being, in traditional Chinese society, being considered as kind of low-profile activity, should be despised, and should be hidden in a kind of inferior spatial position, which is behind the palace. But in reality, from these examples, we can see it, especially the place of market, it doesn't really happen that, because it's in a kind of contradiction with the logic of the market itself. So the market does not always follow this ideal model. Actually, it's, in most cases, it's occupied kind of the center of the city. And for instance, this example is a very old capital, it's Chang'an, and there are two markets located on two parts of the city. The city was actually divided by a huge avenue into two parts. And in the later part, I will explain a bit more on how the market in that time works. But for now, I would say on that moment, the market was very much regulated in a closed environment. It's a kind of worldly environment. But as we could imagine, this against the openness of the urban economy. So very soon, after this dynasty collapse, the market coming back to occupy the street. I mean, the commercial activities start to occupy the open street later. And below is the case of Beijing. We see similar spatial patterns happening. And for next page, I like to focus on the collapse of this kind of Lifang system. Lifang is a kind of a gated area which is smaller than the city. And the market on that moment in Chang'an is a kind of closed environment which only opens a certain day, of a certain time of the day. And not only for the market itself, but the living neighborhood is also warded with a very limited number of gates. And in a book called The City Shaped, it classified Chang'an as a kind of example of the grid city. But in a sense, there are a lot of differences between the eastern city and the west. For instance, the size, there's a huge difference in size. this is a size of one urban block in Chang'an, but it's almost equal with the size of a city in Western sense. And there was a Chinese scholar recently proposed that each urban block in Chang'an eventually is actually it's not a block, it's a city on its small city on its own right, because that city as a capital was totally planned by top-down forces. It forced some people from each province, each other part of the city, to emigrate to this big city, and they living in separately in this separated Lifang, this closed world environment. So this kind of ancient metropolis is quite different than what we have a kind of metropolis now. And actually the size of each Lifang is very similar with the size of a county town in Chinese history. And in Qing dynasty, which is around 200 or 300 years from now, as I said before, the commercial activities cannot be contained by this wooded environment anymore, so they rather dispersed along the street as what we have now. But again, there was still a tradition of treating the street as a kind of closed environment, as if it can really be closed. So they still place some kind of gated structure, somehow as a kind of ornament on the street to show that, okay, this is a kind of market area, there's a symbol of market area, and this is another. So actually the plan of Beijing in this sense is quite similar with old Chang'an, with two markets on the east and west. Here we have also a kind of similar market area that's on the east and the west. So what I want to say here is there is kind of a constant, there is kind of continuity of treating the space as introverted, as closed in Chinese history, and although it's a kind of in contradiction with a kind of openness of the urban economy, but there's this spatial understanding of the city. Still, in all the dynasties, we still can see many examples that it's keep coming back. I mean, even in modern society, even after China became, after the foundation of socialist China in 1949, Chairman Mao still trying to build a kind of what we call danwei system. It's a kind of light institution system to control people's daily activities inside a kind of closed, relatively closed environment. So what I want to say is there's kind of openness requirement of urban environment, and there's always a kind of constant effort trying to close the space. And well, but can we say Chinese culture is really worded and introverted? For instance, the famous war in national scale, that Great War in Qing Dynasty. But actually, the unification of Qing Dynasty is not only depends on this big project of building a great war against the barbarians from the north. It also very much depends on kind of road network system that linked all the different parts of China together. So I would say this strategy of building walls and paths could work more as a kind of alliance in the history instead of as two contradict strategies or two contradict understanding of space. So in the second part of the research, I'm trying to study how this